Have you ever had an idea that you were genuinely excited about, but almost talked yourself out of pursuing it because you didn't have the experience, the money, or the technical skills that you thought that you needed? Maybe you've been looking at all of these new AI tools and watching other people creating apps, websites, online businesses, and digital products, and part of you was thinking, if they can do it, maybe I can too. But then another part of you starts asking questions like, am I too old to be learning this? Did I wait too long? What if I spend all of this time and my money and I still can't figure it out? What if I start telling people what I'm building and then I fail? If that sounds familiar, I completely understand where you're coming from. At 44 years old, with absolutely no coding and software development experience, I decided that I was going to build my first AI-powered app. And let me tell you, I have made some mistakes. Some of those mistakes cost me time, a lot of time. Some of those cost me money. Some used up limited development credits, and some made me seriously question whether I had taken on more than I can handle. But those mistakes also taught me things I never would have learned by sitting on the sidelines, researching, planning, and waiting till I felt completely ready. In this video, I'm sharing 7 of the biggest mistakes I've made while building an AI-powered app with absolutely no coding experience. I'm also going to be telling you what I would do differently if I were starting over today, and give you one simple exercise that you can complete in the next 24 hours if you have an app, business, or digital product idea of any kind to own for yourself. And don't worry, this is not going to be one of those technical coding lessons. I'm not even qualified to give you one of those. This video is about what it really looks like when an ordinary person decides to use AI and no-code technology to build something that she has never built before. This matters right now because we are living through a very unusual moment. AI and no-code platforms have made it possible for people like me, people without traditional software development experience, to begin creating things that they would have once required a technical team and a much larger budget. This is incredibly exciting, but it can also be misleading. When you hear words like no code, it can sound as though you simply describe your idea to AI, push a button, and a completely profitable business appears on the screen. That has not been my experience so far. These tools can help you build much faster, but they can also help you make mistakes even faster. You can spend money on the wrong platform. You can burn through your development credits trying to correct unclear instructions. You can build features that sound exciting, but aren't necessary. You can spend months perfecting something that no real customer has tested. Or you can become so overwhelmed by the process that you abandon the idea that may be actually worth pursuing. On the other side of that, you can also spend years telling yourself that you're not technical enough, young enough, knowledgeable enough, or prepared enough to begin. Either extreme can keep you stuck. You can rush into building without strategy, or you can research forever and never build anything ever at all. I believe that there's some middle ground here. You don't have to know everything before you begin, but you do need to understand what you're building, who you're building it for, and what problem absolutely must be solved by your app, your solution. If this is your first time here, my name is Latasha, and this channel is Grown Woman Strategy. This channel is about what it looks like to create new opportunities, build new income streams, and pursue a different future after 40. I'm not a software developer. I don't have a technology degree. I don't work for some startup and I'm entering into a process with a team of programmers waiting to bring my idea to life. I'm a wife, a mother, a real estate professional, and a woman who is almost 45, trying to build something new during the second half of my life. I'm currently developing my first AI-powered app called PlatePilot using the no-code platforms. PlatePilot is designed to take some of that stress out of deciding what's for dinner. Now, that's the main purpose and what I feel comfortable with sharing about my app PlatePilot before it's actually released. But throughout the process, I have had to develop the idea, organize a project, communicate what I need an AI builder to do, test the results, manage limited development credits, and figure out what to do when I'm correcting one issue of the app and it creates another issue somewhere else. I'm not sharing these lessons because I did everything perfectly. I'm sharing them because I didn't. I'm actually going through this process right now as we're recording this video. And I've made these mistakes, experienced the frustration, and paid attention to what each mistake has taught me. My value in this conversation isn't that I have all of the answers. It's that I'm willing to show you what I've learned in the process already and what it looks like before the success story is completed. So let's get into it. Mistake number one, I started building before I fully defined the simplest version of the app. When I first came up with the idea for PlatePilot, I understood the overwhelming problem I wanted to solve. People are tired, families are busy. Parents get to the end of the day and still have to answer the never-ending question, what are we having for dinner? I know the app needed to make that decision easier. But knowing the general problem is not the same as defining the simplest version of the solution. Once I started building, my imagination took over. I started thinking about all the different ways the app could help people, not only today, but eventually. Every new idea sounded important. Every possibility felt as though it belonged in the first version. The problem was that I had not created a firm boundary between what the app absolutely needed to do at launch and what it could potentially do later. I was thinking about the complete dream instead of the simplest, useful version of the dream. That made the project bigger, more complicated, and more expensive than it needed to be. If I were beginning again, I would start with one question. What is the one successful result a customer must receive from this app? Not 10 results, not every possible feature, one clear result. The lesson I learned is that you have to define what your project must do before you start adding everything it might eventually do. Mistake number two, I tried to solve too many problems at once. This mistake is closely connected to the first one. Once you become emotionally invested in the idea, it is incredibly easy to convince yourself that every good feature is a necessary feature. I kept thinking of adding situations in which the app would be helpful. The ideas weren't bad. In fact, many of them were very good. But a good future idea is not automatically a launch requirement. Every additional feature added another decision. It added another screen, another instruction, another possible error, and another thing that had to be tested. Before I knew it, I was no longer building one straightforward solution. I was trying to solve almost every frustration a person might experience around planning a meal. That was too much responsibility to place on one version of this app, and too much responsibility to place on myself as a first-time app builder. I had to learn that focus is not the same thing as thinking small. Focus means deciding which problems get solved first. The other ideas don't have to disappear. They can go into a future development list. But if everything is a priority, then nothing truly is a priority. Mistake number three, I underestimated how quickly my AI development credits would disappear. The platform I'm using provided a limited number of development or messaging credits. When I began, the number seemed generous. I thought, surely there's no way I'm going to be using all of these. What I didn't understand was how quickly those credits could be used. You use credits to ask for a change. Then, if the AI misunderstood your instructions, then you use more credits to correct the change. If your original request was vague, you may have to explain it again. If the correction causes an unintended problem somewhere else on my app, now I was using more credits to address that problem. One poorly organized request can turn into several separate requests. And I'm saying requests, but I mean prompts. I eventually realized that my prompts could not be casual, scattered thoughts. I needed to slow down before submitting them. I needed to group related changes together explain the expected result clearly, and think through how the new change might affect something that had already been built. This is one of the most practical lessons I learned. When you're building with AI, clarity is part of your budget. A vague request doesn't only waste time. Depending on the platform you're using, it can also waste money or limited resources. By the way, as of recording this video, I am actually still waiting for my messaging credits to reboot on the platform that I'm using so I can actually continue to test my app to get it ready to go to market. So this is still costing me as we speak, and it's really frustrating. Mistake number 4, I assumed that fixing one thing would leave everything else untouched. How wrong I was. This mistake actually surprised me. I would identify a problem, request a correction, and then check to see whether that specific problem had been fixed. If it worked, I would think, okay, great, that's done. But later I would discover that something we had previously corrected was no longer working properly. I learned that an app is not a collection of completely separate features. Its systems are connected. A change in one part can affect navigation, saved information, user choices, and other parts of the experience that appear to have nothing to do with the original correction. Because I had never built software before, I didn't know that I needed to go back and retest areas that I had thought were already finished. I was checking the new correction, but I wasn't always checking the rest of the journey. And that is how I learned about regression testing. In simple terms, regression testing means that after you make a meaningful change, you go back and verify that the previously working parts still work. That may sound obvious to someone with software development experience. It was not obvious to me. Now, I understand that we fix it and the entire experience still works are two different statements. So that leads me to mistake number 5. I tested the app like a creator instead of testing it like a customer. When you create something, you already know what it's supposed to do. You know what each button means. You know why a certain question is being asked. You know what should happen next. Because you have all this information in your head, you can unconsciously work around confusing parts of the experience. A new customer, a new user of my app does not have that knowledge. She doesn't know what I intended. She only knows what she sees on the screen. If she has to stop and figure out what to do next, the experience may not be as simple as I believe that it is. If she clicks something and it ends up somewhere unexpected, she may not continue using the app. And because PlatePilot is meant to reduce stress, the experience itself cannot be another source of stress. I had to stop asking, does the app do what I told it to do? I needed to start asking, would the person I built this for understand what to do without me standing beside her and explaining it? That is a completely different way of testing. Your product can technically function and still be confusing. It can contain impressive features and still fail to solve the customer's problem in a simple way. I learned that intention is not the same thing as user experience. Which brings me to mistake number 6. I confuse progress with perfection. Now, this one was difficult for me because I care a lot about the details. And I don't know if it's relevant or not, but if you follow astrology, I am a September Virgo. If you know anything about September Virgos or Virgos in general, we are perfectionists. And I don't mean like perfectionists to a procrastination degree a lot of times, but we want everything to look perfect. Even if it's not perfect, it needs to look perfect. And this was something really hard that I had to get over and I had to accept about my app, which hasn't launched yet. So I still have time for perfectionism, but not really. But I want the wording to be right. I want the screens to make sense. I want the experience to feel polished and trustworthy. Those things matter, especially when you're asking people to use something that you created, but not every improvement carries the same level of importance before launch. Some creations are essential because the app can't function properly without them. Other improvements, I call them improvements, would be nice to have, but They do not have to delay testing or launching the first useful version of your app. I didn't always separate those two categories. I treated important eventually as though it meant required immediately. Perfection can feel productive because you're constantly working. You're adjusting, improving, rewriting, and reconsidering. But activity is not always progress. Sometimes perfectionism is fear wearing a business outfit. If I continue polishing forever, I never have to face the moment when a real person uses the app and tells me what she thinks. I'm learning that the purpose of my first version is not to prove that I can create something flawless. The purpose is to create something useful enough to test, learn from, and improve. Mistake number 7, I underestimated the emotional side of building something new. The hardest parts of this experience have not always been technical. Sometimes the hardest part has been managing my own thoughts. I've worried about spending this money and not earning it back. I've worried about announcing the app publicly before it's ready. I've worried whether I'm qualified to build it. I questioned whether I chose an idea that is too complicated. I've compared my beginning to people who have technical experience, larger audiences, development teams, and more money to invest. And there have been moments when I felt as though I had made so many corrections that I was going to go backwards instead of forwards. All of that can become especially heavy when you're building after 40. At this stage in life, many of us have families, bills, careers, responsibilities, and people depending on us. Starting over doesn't feel like a cute experiment. There are real consequences if we invest our time and money in something that doesn't work. But I also know that continuing to ignore my ideas has also cost me. I don't want to reach the next decade of my life wondering what might have happened if I had been willing to become a beginner again. The emotional lessons have been this. Building something after 40 requires more than just a strategy for the project. It requires a strategy for staying in the room when you feel discouraged, embarrassed, confused, or unqualified. I can't continue building my app by treating every new idea as an emergency, making isolated corrections without retesting, and waiting for everything to feel perfect before allowing anyone else to see it. That approach would eventually consume my time, my budget, and my confidence. And if you are building something of your own, it could do the same thing to you. The solution is not to become a coder before you allow yourself to begin. The solution is to stop believing that the technology is responsible for the strategy. That was the paradigm shift for me. AI may be able to help build what I request, but I still have to decide what should be built. I have to know who it's for. I have to identify the main problem. I have to decide what is essential now and what belongs in the future list. I have to test the complete customer experience, and I have to be willing to learn from what doesn't work. No code does not mean no planning. No code does not mean no testing, and no code definitely doesn't mean no mistakes. You don't need to think like a software engineer before you start, but you do need to think like a person responsible for the product. That means taking ownership of the problem, the priorities, and the customer's experience. If you have an idea for an app, a digital product, a service, a course, a YouTube channel, or any other business, here is one thing that you can do within the next 24 hours. Start a timer for 30 minutes, take out one sheet of paper or open one blank document and complete these 4 sentences. You could do it after you're done watching this video. So question number 1 or sentence number 1, I am building this for blank. It's important that you're being specific. Don't say everyone. Now, the reason why I'm telling you not to say everyone is because I don't know if you noticed, but I use the pronoun she a lot in this video. And so I imagine my audience as a female of childbearing age, probably has a family or is married to a significant other, and between the ages of about 38 to 55. Or you might even be a male that's probably responsible for figuring out what's for dinner, or maybe wanting to reinvent yourself. It's important that you have your audience in mind. Number 2, the immediate problem this person needs solved is blank. Number 3, The simplest success result I can help this person achieve is blank. And finally, number 4, everything that does not directly create the result goes onto the later list. That's it. You don't have to create your entire business plan tonight. You don't have to choose every feature. You don't have to build your website, create a logo, open 5 social media accounts, and announce your launch. Give yourself 30 minutes to define the person, the problem, the result, and what can wait. Then look at everything you've planned so far. If an idea does not directly create the first successful result, move it to the later list. You don't have to delete it. You're not giving up on it. You are simply refusing to let a future possibility prevent you from completing the first version. Is this exercise really worth doing? I believe it is. But here's the trade-off. You have to postpone some of the features or ideas that excite you the most. The first version may look smaller than the completed version inside your head. You may have to accept that your product will not begin in its final form. And you may have to confront the possibility that you have been using, planning, researching, and perfecting as a way to avoid being evaluated by real people. That can be uncomfortable, but look at what you gain. You gain a project you can realistically complete. You gain a clearer message for your audience. You gain better control over your time and your budget. You gain a simpler product to test. You gain useful feedback from people that you want to serve. And most importantly, you gain evidence that you can finish something you once believed was beyond your ability. If you continue adding, researching, correcting, and perfecting without first identifying the simplest result, you may lose months of your time. You may spend money that you didn't need to spend. You may become so overwhelmed that you convince yourself that the idea was impossible, when the real problem was that the first version was simply too large. Making the first version smaller does not make the dream smaller. It makes the dream more likely to become real. I started building my first AI-powered app at 44, had no coding experience, and I have made 7 major mistakes. I started building before fully defining the simplest version. I tried to solve too many problems at once. I underestimated how quickly my development credits would disappear. I assumed that fixing one feature would leave everything else untouched. I tested the app like its creator instead of testing it like a customer. I confused progress with perfection, and I underestimated how emotionally difficult it would be, or it can be, to build something new after 40. But none of those mistakes means that I shouldn't have started. They taught me that I don't need to know everything before I begin. I need a clear problem, a focused first solution, and organized testing progresses and willingness to continue learning. If you are over 40 and considering building something you've never built before, you are not too late. You are also not required to pretend that it's easy. You're allowed to be new at this. You're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to change your strategy when you learn something new. But you have to be willing to begin and then stay with the process long enough to become better at it. Now, I would love to hear from you. What are you building, or what have you been thinking about building? And what is the one problem your idea is supposed to solve? Tell me in the comments. If you want to follow the honest journey of a grown woman building her first AI app, creating new income streams, and figuring out what starting over after 40 really looks like, subscribe to Grown Woman Strategy. I'm sharing the mistakes, the setbacks, the lessons, and hopefully, eventually, the launch. In my next video, I'm going to be talking about some of the income streams that I'm using to fund my app and the launch as my bridge. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.